So I think we will start our conversation with our good panel. We just want to have a discussion with all of you, just to try and understand. You people have been at the forefront of supporting different initiatives within East Africa on issues to do with social justice. We would want to have a small debunk from yourselves. When we talk about social justice, what does this mean? I know people in this room who come from the development side that might not really resonate with, they might not clearly get the underlying issues of social justice. And we thought it would be important for us to start with having a discussion around that. When you talk about social justice, Jackson, what does that mean to you?
Thank you so much, Gloria, for the question. First and foremost, I'm also happy to be in this panel, and today going to learn and hear from my panelists and also exchange and get almost 100 different perspectives from the audience seated here. I want to say I work in an organization called Forum CIV that stands for each day going to the office, I work to contribute to a just and sustainable world where everyone has the power to effect change. And I think that vision of my organization resonates with the theme of the discussion you're having this morning. My understanding of social justice is basically having an institution or an organ that is based on the principles of equality and the solidarity, and the work that thereof happens must adhere to the respect of human rights. And in so doing, the social justice must ensure that people and the communities are supported based on their need equitably, because you cannot universally put them together and say they are entitled, this organization is entitled to receive X kind of support, because they are different. So understanding their differential nature also ensures that the justice system must be equitable. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jessica, I think the same question, what does social justice mean? But also, in the work that you do, what is the foundational driving change that you see when it comes to social justice? Change. Yeah.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I appreciate the reggae special request. Because we're talking about systems, and I said that, we can speak with big English, but the reality is we all live in systems of inequality, and so we know what they are. And so Bob Marley has this phrase, who feels it knows it. And I think one of the reasons that you find the people who are most affected by injustice at the forefront of movements for justice is because who feels it knows it. If you know what it feels like to be hungry, you will be the person fighting for food. If you know what it feels like to not have a home, you will be the person fighting against evictions, right? And in reggae is one genre of music that actually spends a lot of time deconstructing systems, right? People always sing about the system, Babylon system, the system.
So it was just a way to bring it down to all of us to say that we all understand systems because we all live in them. So social justice is both a process and a destination, because we all in our missions talk about this vision of a world where everybody has equal rights, respect, inclusion, access according to their needs in all our diversities, right? That's a vision, right? It's a destination. But the reality is that our world is so profoundly unequal. And so social justice is also the process of reorganizing power relations across the economic, the social, the political, but also the cultural, the imagination, right? The imagination of who we are, the languages we speak, right? The respect for the fact that we all have deep knowledges, and particularly for this continent where the ghosts of colonization are really still haunting us, this piece is critical. So it's the process of engaging in sustaining the work of reorganizing power relations so that every single human being as themselves and in whatever formation they find themselves in community has the ability to thrive.
Yeah, Lulu, same question, social justice. What does that mean to you?
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, and also very happy to be here this morning. Happy to be a part of this, especially during this time. We're all East Africans or Africans, and in solidarity. Yes, so in terms of access to justice, which is what we do, we focus on the most marginalized and vulnerable communities, particularly women, and when we think about social justice, we think about making sure that there is accessibility of services, there is affordability of services. Previous panelists also spoke about equity and in terms of receiving these services, but also inclusion as well, and making sure that everyone within the community is also a part of the changes that are happening in that community, and they're fully engaged and fully involved in what happens within their own community. So it's making sure that we reach the most hard to reach people within the community. We make sure that they also have a say in what happens within their community, and they are able to benefit from what goes into that community. So it's about the whole 360, looking at how the support or the funding that goes into the community affects the people who are really in need within the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Wanja, social justice, the definition of social justice to you and the work that you do, and how does it influence the work that you do?
Yes, thanks Gloria, and just adding to what everyone else has said here. I work for an organization, a grant maker that works with criminalized populations, that works with populations that are the farthest. And our definition of social justice is, how do we ensure that the people who are affected, people who suffer the most are at the center of the decision making? How do we make sure that they're the people who brings about the society that they think is just, the society that probably we may think is not just, but it is what is just for them? How do we empower them? And by empowering here, I want to sort of get away from the one thing that I personally think has capacitated the populations that we work with, which is education. And why I'm saying this is proud that most of the communities that we serve, they do not have capacities to engage. So because of that, we literally remove the power from them, and we tend to be the people who have that power. So for us, the just society is a society that identifies the root causes of the oppression, identifies and appreciates the assets that the communities bring to the space, and ensures that how do we amplify those assets so that these populations are able to push for the society, a society that advances the fundamental rights that everyone else enjoys. Thank you.
Thank you everybody. And I think what I have heard all of us say is that social justice is to us a place where we get to a place where we ensure that equity is served to different communities. Systems that are within these communities are broken so that people can be able to access justice when they need justice. They can be able to access resources that they need to access. When we are talking about systems, I would just want us to also have a very brief discussion on these systems that we are talking about, because there's usually an idea behind social justice not being implemented because there are some systems that are working against social justice being served to the people. So I don't know, I will just hand it to anybody. When we talk about systems, if someone can give us a conceptualization of what these systems look like and maybe how we need to deal with these particular systems. Anybody can go.
Thank you so much, Gloria. I think of a system, very basic. My body is a system. It has very many parts, and each of the parts does very unique role, but ultimately, for the better functioning of my body, each system must work. So in system thinking, in philanthropy, systems are meant or put in place to ensure there is efficiency in either resource allocation, in delivery, and in the grant-making process itself. Because grant-making is just one of the process, because there are very many parts. And therefore, if I may use a classical example on the work that we do and the systems that have been put in place. The systems are put in place to get funding, because being an intermediate organization from different funders, and once you have this funding, then you are able to allocate based on the principle of putting the communities at the center of the actions while you work with local and other international organizations. As you put this system, you are also receiving funding from an entity that also has systems. I want you to see the complexity of systems. And why are these systems in place? Because we know if there are no systems in place, there will be no order. At least you need order for even the change you want to see to be able to track it down and measure it. However, as you were mentioning about, you can have systems in place that can actually not help you to achieve the intended purpose of the grant making that you have. And who are behind the systems? It's you and me. It's actually human beings who are behind systems. Some human beings can decide to make the systems work for them and not work for the intended purpose. And I think as we discuss the whole system approach, we must look at what are the parts and the pieces that make this system that is not functional, and how do we address. And a very basic example also is what you have seen in Kenya. The government is not functioning. The political system is not working. What people have done, they know where it is paining most, and they must address that pain point. And once addressed, we believe that the system will work. But we know the systems may not fully work 100%. But if it's an optimal functioning and everybody is happy, I think we are able to say we have 5-10% risk of non-performance, we have 90% chance of success, so we can live to continue reforming until we feel we have a point of perfection. So I think mine is to see what parts and the pieces of this system, if it's grant making, where do we see? Is it procedures? Is it rules that are too tight? And how can we ensure that as we ensure accountability of the funds and the resources that go out, we also build the trust over time. Trust, as somebody said, I trust you, but sometimes you have to verify. That's why if Jessica gives me funding, they trust that we do the work. But they will ask us to do verification on how we spend the funding. And for the basic principle that the resource where it is coming from, you need to see and tie to the results and the eventual impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackson, for that elaborate deep dive into what the systems are. I think then if that is the understanding that we have, then I think it would also be important for us to try and discuss what are some of the robust frameworks and terminologies that we can adopt to ensure that the strategies that we are putting in place are coherent, they are unified, and they are potent in driving effective change. So what are some of these frameworks that we can put in place? Because systems must be there, at least from the level of supporting the work of social justice. But what are some of these robust strategies that can be adopted? Jessica?
Okay, I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge that we all already exist within systems of different kinds. As Jackson was saying, there are systems at different levels, even from the basic level of our human bodies, all the way through to the organizations and platforms that we're a part of, to the national systems, to the economic infrastructure of the world, etc. I mean, we're part legal systems, etc. So we're all located in systems. I actually think that if we're having this conversation, I mean, the whole introduction up to us getting on the stage was just this idea of, where are we? Where are we as East Africa? And in some respect, what's the plan, right? We have a lot of big challenges. We have lots of possibilities. Eric Kimani was speaking a lot about technology, which is interesting because, again, I think it's a real East African capacity. You don't actually hear that conversation as much in other regions of the world. It's a real East African capacity. So we're already in the systems. I think the first thing that we need to do is to just map them out. And sometimes it's about you in your own institution just mapping out and figuring out what are you trying to influence and what are the different actors. If a system is basically a set of interlinked actors and processes, okay? So to not make it too big, you perhaps just begin with who you are and where you sit, and all of the different actors and processes that influence your ability to do whatever it is you're trying to do with greater impact. And I think that may vary slightly amongst us because we all connected to slightly different things. But we may also then want to keep thinking about some of the systems that we don't look at and we don't think about. For example, in philanthropy, one of the primary things that we deal with is what? What's the primary tool we have in philanthropy? What's the primary tool we have? Money. So to what extent do we actually sit and think about money and how it operates in the world, right? And what financial systems look like and what that money is doing before it gets to us? We often think a lot about what it does once we give it away. So for example, the Ford Foundation is an endowed foundation. We have a very significant endowment, which means that with that scale of money, we also have an impact on the conversation in some economic systems, certainly in philanthropy. So the Ford Foundation board took that really seriously, and especially under President Darren Walker, really said, whatever money we have as an endowment, which is basically how we raise the money to fund work, right, in the world, has to work in a manner that is in keeping with the way that we give the money. We can't have money invested in things that harm and undermine social and environmental justice and then fund the other side to ameliorate it. That doesn't make sense, okay? So they've gone through many iterations of making sure that the endowment is invested in a manner that not just doesn't passively harm, like we don't invest in military and tobacco and rights violating companies and what have you, with divesting from fossil fuel investments, but that also there's a piece of the endowment that proactively invests with impact to support a range of social questions. So we have $1 billion of the endowment invested through mission investments in things that are expanding women-led businesses, expanding entrepreneurship with environmental impact, etc. So this again is a way of thinking about systems, right? You literally look at yourself and figure out who are you in this space, what are you trying to achieve, what do you have influence on, and then to make sure that it's all coherent. Because very often when we're called out, it's because people say you're being incoherent. You say one thing, you do another, right? And so again, to just map out who you are, what your role is in the system, and how can you, in everything that you do, seek to transform the relationships to make the system work better.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Jessica. You have shown us the way in how we can try to put some thinking into co-operations for tackling the complexities that come within the systems and how we can challenge that. So, Lulu, I would want you, maybe picking from that, to give us your thoughts on what it will mean for us achieving systematic change, what it requires for us to achieve systematic change. Of course, it requires harmonized efforts, but how can we foster alignment and coherence, either be it in the language that we use, and also conceptual frameworks that Jessica has discussed. So how can we better look into that?
Thank you. It's a very interesting conversation because it has so many different dynamics to it. I think first of all we need to think differently in terms of how we define the relationship in terms of funding itself, in terms of the structure, the current systems that exist, the top-down approach. We need to think about looking at it in a more inclusive way in terms of, can it be something that is more collaborative? Can it be more of strategic partnerships? Can it be more, we talk a lot about transparency and accountability, but then transparency and accountability, to which end? I think whether you're being funded or doing the funding, there is transparency and accountability on both sides. Jessica spoke about being vague and sometimes not being understood, and I think sometimes that deliberate as well. It is deliberate as well, so that there is no transparency, so that there is no accountability. And if we really are serious about bringing the change, then we have to think about when we speak about accountability, who is supposed to be accountable? I think everybody should be accountable. All sides should be accountable. All sides should also be transparency. There is a language around trust, which I really don't like, because what does trust actually mean? When you say there has to be trust, what does that actually mean? Is it a top-down approach again? Should trust be on all sides? We talk about trust being earned. How is that trust earned? And where do we get to a point where we say this trust has actually been earned? And how long? There is a lot of conversation around Global South, Global North, and when you have these conversations, I think you create a barrier. And the barrier is there is this level, and then there is that level, and then this level has to trust that level in order for something to happen. But then you have people who are actually the, how I would say, people who are actually on the ground, people who are actually, we talked about the good example again, the person who is hungry knows how to fight for that food, knows that they want the food, and knows what to do when they do get that food. So where do we get to a point where we trust each other enough to say they know exactly what they want and they know what they're going to do about it? But of course that is earned. Of course there is credibility. Of course there is accountability. Of course there is transparency. And of course there has to be systems, but to what extent? Not to the extent where it creates an obstacle, not to an extent where there is no flexibility, not to an extent where it doesn't allow for capacity strengthening, it doesn't allow for support in terms of really understanding where each party is coming from. And I think capacity strengthening can happen again on both ends in terms of build each other's capacity with regards to the situation on the ground and also the situation above ground as well, in terms of how do we together, again inclusivity, how do we together in a strategic partnership create a space where we can both address the challenges that we face so that we're able to support each other. So strategic multi-year partnerships, long-term sustainability, I think is the language that we should be speaking about.
Amazing, long-term sustainability conversations. And thank you, Lulu, for challenging us to think differently beyond what the regular things that we have been talking about, and also ensuring that even when we are bringing issues on the table, we become as inclusive as possible and not cherry picking on issues that, of course, have been at the center of different support over time. So I want us to shift gears a little, Wanja, and look into, take a deep dive into the systems change. How we need to bring ourselves to a point where we have a discussion on deconstructing power dynamics. And from you and with the work that you're doing, what are some of the mechanisms and strategies that dismantle power imbalances within philanthropy to drive systematic change?
Thank you, Gloria. And this is just actually building on everything that everyone else has said here. Because when we are talking about deconstructing power, it's first of all understanding even where the power lies and what are these powers that we are talking about. And you cannot do this without the communities that you are working with being, again, at the center. Them being the people who are actually informing the systems, being the people who are informing the processes, being the people who are actually informing even the money and how that money needs to move. So what I'm trying to say here is that participatory grant making is what has worked for us, has continued to work. But then even as we talk about participatory grant making, it also comes with a lot of innovation. It comes a lot with also a lot of us even being able to criticize that system and asking ourselves, what exactly does that mean? What does the aspect of trust that has been mentioned here mean? What does accountability mean? I want to just go deep into one of the things that we've been struggling with. Oh, perfect. Yeah, so. Who is in the room? Yeah, so I was saying that, so one of the things that we've been struggling with is actually us questioning ourselves on our understanding of trust. Lulu has just said that trust goes two ways. It does not go one way, that we just want the people that we are funding to be the people who need to have trust, or rather be the people who are accountable. But then how do we also ensure that we are also accountable to the movement? How do we ensure that we are using the word trust both ways? And so when even, where I was going with that example is that one of the things that we have struggled with is how do we move resources to movements or to organizations that do not have structures? And again, having in mind that if we are talking about change, the people who are at the center of this change are the grassroots organizations. They are those organizations in the northern part of Kakuma, an LGBTI organization that is in Lodwar, whereby even organizing, they have to organize in very hidden spaces. And so you don't expect them to have a bank. You don't expect the organizations to be registered. So how do we move resources to those organizations? How would we trust that if we moved that money to someone's account, they'll be able to do the work that they are meant to do? So for us, looking at how do we deconstruct power is us being vulnerable, is us try to trust the community that we serve. Is us also moving with the aspect of understanding trauma. Like the trauma that we also move into this work that has been informed by the colonial structures, that has been informed also by the way that we have been taught in schools and everywhere else. So how do we balance all this such that anything that we do that is community-led, it's actually community-led? That when we talk of meaningful engagement, we are not just ticking the boxes, but we are actually getting the community at the center to define what does long-term sustainability for them look like. What does multi-year look like? And I can see Gloria telling me, keep quiet, we want to move. Yeah, so for us, it's a whole thing of even flexibility. Most of the donors who even are in this room do not even support co-support. We want to give organizations money to go and implement, to go and do work, but we don't ask ourselves, how are they going to do this work? Who is going to do this work? Where is self-care? Who takes care of the carers as they go to take care of these people? So for me, deconstructing power is being able to analyze things that impede the same change that we actually want to look at. Is how do we empower the people, those carers, the people who are moving out there to work? How do we, and we can only do this again by one, giving people co-support. Let's support people's salaries. Let's support self-care. Let's support people in a long-term way so that then they are able to do work that will sustain the kind of systems that we actually want to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Wanja, you made me clap there. I almost forgot that I am a moderator. I almost wore my other cap. And yes, I totally agree with you. Supporting core functions of an institution ensures that the issues that we are discussing right now, for instance, social change, are actually looked into. Last week, there has been this question that has been around media and, of course, coming from powers that may, who was funding the protests that were happening last week. Of course, that is not a question that I'm going to answer. From where I sit, nobody funded. But also, Wanja, you have said something that I think is critical for us to think about. Co-funding support. What does that mean and what can it do for us? And with regard to that, you've also touched on you've touched on partnerships, catalytic partnerships that are very crucial for addressing deep-rooted social issues. So I think, Jackson, I will hand it over to you and just ask you, what are some of the fundamental elements that define these transformative collaborations that are there in social justice grant making, and how can they be structured to be innovative and revolutionary? Wanja actually talked a lot about innovation. So what is this of an innovation and revolutionary grant making that people are looking at?
Thank you so much, Gloria. The chairman of the East Africa Philanthropy Network, in his opening remarks, mentioned also about the innovations in grant making. He talked about social finance, he talked about impact investments, and how different organizations can use these opportunities that are available to expand the work that we are doing and also extending impact. Use of technology-enabled tools to deliver philanthropy work. It's also happening to ensure that the traditional, every one of us knows the traditional way of doing things. And this traditional way, you pass through an education system which was very traditional, structured to deliver a particular purpose. It's not expected after going through your very many years of a system that was also designed for a purpose that as we were not part of, for you to start changing midnight. It takes time, even for you to start seeing this. So I think adopting, being agile and adaptive and looking at the context in which we are operating makes us change tact and approaches of grant making or ensuring that philanthropy works. I just wanted to use a practical example. 6 years ago, I joined Forum Civ, and the grant making process was very rules oriented, structure. You go 2 steps, you must move to the next step. And it recognizing working with structured traditional organizations. So you may find it difficult if you are not fitting in the definition of who should be able to get the support. But we thought and reflected that this is a learning organization, because being a learning organization, Forum Civ is born in 1985. 95 is a Gen Z. It's a Gen Z organization. So we thought and said, why should we have these rules? You know, the way you question many things. Is it working for us? So what do we do to change? Instead of sitting and saying the organization has established rules and procedures, we said, I think we need to listen to the voices of the people that we support. For the very first time, we introduced what we call, this is an international organization, grants to individuals. I think Will Oeba and the team, I'm happy to see that we also fished him out from Nakuru, build his capacity together with many others as an individual and a collective of artists to be who he is. We also supported many other individuals in Kenya, because as a model. And what we ensured, let this go into the organizational way of doing things. But we also moved further from supporting traditional organization. And when I say traditional, you all know, if you talk about traditional civil society, everybody knows traditional civil society. We moved to new media, non-traditional actors, grassroots organizations who ordinarily make a space on the table to be granted, because one, they don't have the capacity, which we keep talking about. But the question was, what are you talking about capacity? It is us who don't have the capacity to understand the work that they do. And we changed the narrative from talking about capacity building to capacity exchange, because there is a lot that we are learning from this organization. It's the money we have, but who has the knowledge? It is them who do the real work. As Jessica said, if you are hungry, you are actually the one who knows how to go out and fish for food. So changing these already existing systems in organization is one way of saying, look, we are not going to be depending on these rules that have been set 30 years ago, and they were north-south lens. We need to change the narrative and say we can shift the structures by incorporating what we see can work in this part of the world. Additionally, I want to say there is a common, other than social impact investments or the like, there is the common one on technical assistance and support that can usually be given to organizations. They get funding, but you understand that they need to build their systems and very many other. How do you then ensure that you anchor the support that is required for these organizations to be who they wish their mission to be in the future? In this sense, for any organization to be, because we funders are there, grant makers are there are things that the organization must have. And what sometimes we are not being told, there is a threshold. You may want to be accessing, but there are inhibitors that make you not access those kind of resources. How do we build you together with us, you have support, to ensure that you check all the boxes? Because sometimes you must check those boxes, and that's the reality. And going to support this organization through technical assistance and support enables them then to ensure that they are up in the game and they can be seen and heard and their voices loudest for them to continue getting support to pursue their mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackson. We are being challenged to innovatively think. We are in the Gen Z era, and innovation is quite critical on how we move forward. And Jessica, I would want to we would want to hear from you. We know that despite their immense potential, catalytic partnerships often encounter significant barriers. Drawing from your extensive experience, what are the most formidable obstacles to these partnerships, and what strategic approaches have successfully surmounted these barriers to achieve enduring collective impact? Can I repeat that again?
For 20 marks. Okay, look. So I had suggested that to begin, you need to figure out what are you trying to achieve, basically, what's the purpose of what you're trying to do, and then to locate yourself in a set of actors and relationships that affect your ability to do that well. Yeah? So you're mapping your own system as a grant-making entity. Some people in the room are also grant seekers, and you could do similar, including if you do both. I think it's really critical that you understand the actors that you're dealing with. So, because you must understand, I'm one of those people that will always push us. I will always push us, because I think that some things become orthodoxies and they're not wholly true. Okay? So, for example, there is this constant question of funding unregistered, funding small, funding core, and everything. The reality is, some donors can't. They just can't. When you're dealing with a government that is using taxpayers' money to fund initiatives, they have a level of accountability and very often a level of pressure at home around why are you giving money to poor black people? Why are you sending money to Africans when we need it, right? A lot of European governments, for example, are facing that question. So they will put a huge amount of bureaucracy alongside the money so that they themselves can even sustain the flow, okay? You have to understand that, because I think if you don't, you're going to be, again, trying to, they say squeeze blood out of a stone, like there's no point. There's some things that can't do the thing that you want them to do, and it just is what it is. Who can? Who can? So I really do think that we need to start thinking a little bit more broadly in some of the questions that we're asking. Some pieces of the philanthropic ecosystem can, and I think that that's where we need to encourage, okay? The Ford Foundation has for years now experimented with these very questions, and we do that. We say we fund institutions, individuals, and ideas. A lot of the individuals that we fund is through fellowships. It becomes a more structured approach to do it because it's also a way that we can systematize the relationship. Everybody needs to be accountable when it comes to money. We need to be accountable. Why? Because as Willie Oyeba said in the poem, we are workers. We are workers. All of us here are in service of justice. We all need to be accountable, okay? We need to be accountable, and we figure out how we can do that. I remember years ago, I was funding, I got a funding request from an organization of Burmese people in Thailand. Because of the situation in Burma, they couldn't be registered. They had created an entire infrastructure that was enviable, participatory, everything. It's just that they had no formal paperwork. Because they couldn't, because they were refugees in an environment that didn't enable them to formally register. But for the sake of accountability for their community, they had created every single structure they would need, right? It's just that they didn't have the papers, but the structure was there. My point is that accountability is something we all can create, whatever that looks like. If we are in the service of justice and in the service of community, we have to accept that we also need to be accountable even as individuals. So for me, accountability is a non-negotiable because we resource in order to advance the work. That can include making sure that the people who do the work are well. That's not a problem. That can include ensuring that we're paying adequate overheads, and we do. 80% of our grant making is in core flexible support. The rest isn't because it can't be. When we fund government, for example, we have to fund with very clear line items and budget lines because the nature of government is that it already has its core funding, right? It funds the civil service. So we pay a particular, right? Or if organizations are not 501c3 equivalent, we cannot actually give core by law, right? But wherever we can, we do. So to me, I think the question is, we did build 5 years, unrestricted resourcing to encourage organizations to innovate. What's difficult is that other people don't pick it up, right? And so what organizations find is that you resource in that way, they build out a whole vision of what it would look like if they had more flexibility, but no other donor in the system changes. And so they end up 5 years later with the same balance of project and then the Ford Foundation giving them flexible money. So it's also a push again to our sector to really think about, I understand where people cannot, and like I said, we have to be cognizant about where that isn't possible for whatever reasons. But where it is, ask the question, can we do more to resource things in a manner where things can thrive? Just one quick example, the work on violence against women. I've spent my whole life, right, involved in what is collective work around thinking about how do we move from a reality where 1 in 3 women will be physically or sexually violated by their intimate partner in their lifetime. That is a global statistic, it's well documented, and it's actually underpitched because reporting is low. So imagine, right? What's so interesting is this, and in some respects, pick different pieces of the system. People were like, we need to reform the law. Other people say, we need to provide services. A group of people sat and thought, wait a minute, but underlying all of this, why is it that things aren't shifting? We changed the law, and then a woman who's being abused goes to the police, and the police say to her, why are you coming here? Go, this is your husband, deal with it, right? It's not our problem. Or why are you coming here? Go and resolve it, right? Which is common. Or you get into courts, and again, the magistrates say, yeah, but you know, well, maybe it was your fault, right? Sometimes people themselves don't even come forward in a legal system because they do blame themselves for being at fault, when in fact it wasn't their fault at all, because nobody, regardless of what you do, deserves to be harmed by another person. Nobody, right? And so people sat back and said, the thing that we're not tackling at all is the norms, right? What are the pervasive social norms that mean that upwards of 60% of people in most countries actually believe that it's appropriate for a man to hit a woman for a variety of reasons, including things like not making sure that there's hot food on the table, okay? That's there in the statistics. You can read them in the demographic health surveys and all of that, okay? Why is that? And how can we intervene? I would like to take credit for the fact that a group of Ugandans actually were willing, a community was willing to try this SASA model, which was an effort to see what would it look like if we mobilized community actors to enter into communities and to begin to have deep questions about the norms. And so they decided too that they wanted to do this in a manner where there would be an evidence base. So they actually agreed to do a randomized controlled trial. They had one community that had this intervention, another community that just had other interventions without this component. And what they found was that actually in a project time frame, so under 5 years, they were actually able to shift prevalence, okay? They were able to change norms and attitudes that supported violence against women and also multiple sexual partners that leads to the spread of HIV. But they were also able then to change prevalence, so the number of women actually being harmed reduced. Okay, Ugandans. There, Michael. Okay. I see my people. Okay, I'm taking claim because it's a global triumph that was accomplished by East Africans. That's why I'm just trying us to embrace it. Okay, this is fascinating, right? This is fascinating. And again, making sure that you also deploy all of the tools in the system. So this is feminist advocates who work around community change, who are engaging with public health professionals, researchers. It was difficult. There were lots of things that, you know, in between their relationships that were very different because the logics of public health and the logics of activist intervention can be different sometimes. But in the end, what it means is that we now have this growing evidence base of things that actually work to intervene. My question is, to what extent are any of you funding on violence against women looking at this research to change what you do? So I think that when we talk about innovation, there's also a piece about us. To what extent are we constantly looking at what's going on, constantly reading up, constantly learning, and amending and adapting what we do so that it's fit for purpose. We have a lot of examples actually around that show us how things can transform, right? And we also need to take the time to look at them and see what happens. Build, as I explained, the Ford Initiative has an evidence base. We did a large evaluation, and it showed that actually the premise of giving organizations significant, completely flexible, multi-year support with full trust actually leads to all of the outcomes, from project to resilience, all of those outcomes significantly increase. There is an evidence base for that. If you want to make the argument in your organization for it, you can find that evidence, it's freely available, and push for the argument that actually there is evidence to prove there's both a demand for it, but there's also evidence to show that it actually works. And that for me is the thing about these innovation ecosystems. We can only innovate if we keep reflecting and actually changing what we do. Innovation is not sitting with a new hairdo, right? It's actually literally going and figuring out, is some of the stuff we're doing not working? And if it's not working, how do we figure out how to do something that does? And again, do we have to invent it? Do we have to look around and see where it is working and adapt it to what we do? How do we ourselves change so that we're keeping up, but we're also doing things in a manner that ends up with this vision of change that we all state that we're here for?
Thank you so much, Jessica, for those thoughts. My next statement will actually make me a true East African. Unfortunately, time is not on our side. As much as the conversations are quite great and thought-provoking, we will need to move to the next level, but I am hearing some things coming out, even as we are going to our workshops. These are things that I think would need to linger in our minds for us to continue discussions. I'm hearing about the need for us to think differently in the different spaces that we are supporting. I'm hearing issues to do with trust, and of course I know we have a whole session where we'll be looking into that. I am hearing innovation based on the environment and the context that we are that we are working in at particular and different moments. I am hearing issues of vulnerabilities. What are some of the things that we need to look into, even as we are supporting different initiatives? I am hearing accountability. Accountability to ourselves as grant makers, but also accountability that comes from the other side of the people who we are supporting. This, of course, is a conversation that we cannot end here. And the good thing is that the way the workshop has been planned today is that they knew the 1 hour they had given us is not enough at all. And therefore, we will go into workshops and have discussions. I can see a lot of pressure from that corner with regard to time, but if you would allow me just 1 minute for each of my panelists to give what I would want to call parting shot. Parting shot for this session, but of course knowing very well that this particular discussion on how there needs to be system reforms in the space that we are working with can continue. So 1 minute, please. The pressure from that corner is, yeah. Wanja?
Okay. It's always hard to tell Wanja to give a sentence.
Please try.
I will try. And I think my parting shot will come from what Jessica was talking about, of how do we balance the money that we are getting from wherever we are getting and the money that we are moving out. And for me, it just like lists quite a number of challenges, and it lists also thoughts. And I am just wondering of how best can we move our philanthropic advocacy to also some of these governments, so that even as they give our money, they give money that is actually going towards bringing about change. And I know that is not easy, and especially when we are talking about governments that have moved towards the rightist, and that development is actually not one of the core business that they are doing. But I think it's something that is challenging us, and will keep challenging us now and again, on how do we get that money? How do we ensure we get that money, because it's our money, so that then we are able to do the heavy task of accounting to them, but at the same time removing the most work from the grantees that we are giving the grants.
Thank you, Wanja. Lulu?
1 minute. I'm in a very unique position of being both a grant maker but also a grantee as well. So I would say 3 things very, very quickly. The first one I mentioned before, multi-year strategic sustainable partnerships, and this includes core funding. I will repeat core funding only because it's becoming more and more evident that the funding is project-based. You don't expect people to deliver when they cannot exist. So that is one. The second one, I would say, is having a shared vision in terms of it should be more of collaboration, inclusion, and supportive kind of environment where we work together towards a strategic goal, a shared goal, and not, on different levels. And then the third is basically making sure that there is support. We talk a lot about capacity development or institutional strengthening, but I think it's also important to think about leveraging the capacity to fundraise and resource mobilization together, so that we ensure there's sustainability, because sustainability affects all of us, not just one party. So I would stop there for now. Thank you.
Lulu? Jessica?
Sure, to maybe reiterate, so again, we begin by, identifying what your purpose is, what you're trying to change, locate yourself and map the system that you're in, right? And look at the actors. I would really encourage us to look at actors that we're not currently engaging. Who is there but you're not really paying much attention to? And in that, because we're in an East African space, I would say, who are the East African philanthropic actors that we're not thinking about? Because I think in our minds, we still think of donors as guys out there, right? Meanwhile, we actually have growing and pretty vibrant East African philanthropic actors, from foundations and trusts to corporate CSR, to various kinds of now financing with impact, and also to everyday people, as we've seen in the Kenyan, context over the past 3 weeks. The amount of money that individuals raised for burial costs and for medical fees, considering people's actual cash in their pockets, was actually very significant. So who are we not paying attention to? How do we grow East African resourcing? You can never be independent until you have your independent resources, my people, okay? So how do we grow that? And how do we think about that? And also then do it from the basis of what we know East Africans need, so that we build a thriving East African philanthropic ecosystem based on our priorities and how we understand the work and what we most need in order to achieve, again, this common goal of justice.
I want to make my also 1 minute of remarks. That data-driven decision-making is quite important, even as philanthropists work together with other partners to create change. As Jessica said, evidence-based study can give you a green light on what you need to do and what you shouldn't do to achieve the results. The second is about transparency. We've talked about it. Transparency and accountability, quite important in every process, even in our own lives. We do that. Adaptive and being innovative in the work that we are doing is another important factor to look at, because, for example, the global north, the Europe is moving to the right. The right wings are not pro this development. How do we adapt these changes and be innovative, even as we do philanthropic work? Ecosystem support instead of looking at a single support, can we look at the ecosystem as a whole? If it's network building, movement building, how do we build this? Because then it's much easier to see bigger change. Finally, somebody doesn't want me to finalize this. I was asked 2 weeks ago during school half-term that why do you wake up every morning to go and work? Is it because of fear or passion? I don't know what you would answer. And we concluded that we all work because of fear. That if I don't, people will be hungry. If we don't reform our systems, because the moment you think you are sleeping and you're not working towards reforming the system, then you not have a life. So think about it, whether you waking up to work because of fear or because of passion. Thank you.
Wow, amazing. Is your daughter a Gen Z? Clearly. And for me, during my, when I was preparing for this session, I actually had to write this down for all of us who are in this room so that we continue thinking about it. I want to thank you for believing. This is for the philanthropists in the room. I want to thank you for believing and learning to be patient with us and with yourselves. When you invest in people and expect results instantly, you're likely to be frustrated. But when you engage in long-term and sustainable work, Lulu, thank you so much. These results will be manifested in people's power. And I cannot give a better example than the last 3 weeks in Kenya. For that, we want to say thank you for engaging with us. Unfortunately, we do not have time for you to ask questions to my panel, but the good news is that we are here today and tomorrow. We are having workshops that are a continuation of this conversation that we have started here. I want us to harness and take that opportunity and speak to my colleagues here. I know they have more that they would have really wanted to share, but unfortunately time was not on our end. If you look at the program, I have seen we have a dedicated slot for networking. Seize that moment, reach out to them, and reach out to the others who are part of the audience and are not in the plenary, and have further discussions. We need to bring change, and this change can only be brought with us. Thank you so much, and have a productive 2 days. Asanteni.